In 2005, gaming was in a golden age. The previous year, both Half-Life 2 and Halo 2 released, and to say that the first-person shooter genre was packed to the brim with modern classics would be a bit of an understatement.
For one, I was laid off, so I don't work tomorrow, which is great because Halo 2 is...
There was a certain competitive spirit in the air during this time. There weren't any battle passes or microtransactions. The way your game made money was by selling copies, and the way you sold copies was by your game just being downright better than everyone else's. Around this time, a dev studio called Monolith Productions proved they understood this, and released a game so technically impressive and ahead of its time that not even the future installments in the series could fill the combat boots that the first game strode around in. And what was this game? Well, these days it's a real relic, a reminder of how easily success can be fumbled. A horror game so ahead of its time, yet lost to time simultaneously. A game called Hello and welcome to my F.E.A.R retrospective. Now, before we get started, something interesting to note is that, as I mentioned before, this game was developed by Monolith Studios, and something that's not very common for the channel is that this game, as far as I could tell, has had no development issues. Monolith Studios set out to make an action horror game, and they just did that. The game is a love child of multiple horror media influences, with most of them being Japanese. Mostly it took inspiration from movies like The Ring, The Grudge, Memento Mori, Dark Water, the list goes on. But something I've always found fascinating about the game is the inverse of normal J-horror. There's games like Resident Evil or The Evil Within, which are made by Japanese studios making American-based games with Japanese culture injected into them, which could be clearly felt while playing them.
Jake, please stop.
Put a bullet in your head.
Put your gun down.
Drop your weapon.
Don't do this!
This game, on the other hand, was developed by an American studio, which took Japanese influences and injected American culture back into the concepts. And the result to me has always felt a little bit like an alternate version of Resident Evil. The main concepts of big shadowy plots, evil corporations, and scary monsters are all there, but you can see that they've been constructed using a completely different lens. Anyway, getting down to the real details, in the game you play as silent protagonist Pointman, who has no real name, doesn't talk, doesn't have a personality, and also doesn't really seem to care what's happening in the campaign, so I'd say pretty stock standard for an early 2000s FPS protagonist. The whole premise of the plot is that Pointman is posted to F.E.A.R, a secret government task force that combats paranormal threats, and when a corporation's failed science experiment gets loose, he's a part of the team that gets called in to clean up the mess. Anyway, this is all obviously stuff we're going to talk about later, so to stop me from banging on too much, let's just get into it. So the game starts with almost a dream-like cutscene. A man in a room is on his knees, and a small girl approaches him. As he screams, we see scenes of soldiers gearing up, and of the man killing security guards. Finally, for one more shot, we see him eating someone. Next thing, we're slammed point blank into Pointman's shoes in F.E.A.R HQ, where we receive a briefing of an urgent mission from our handler Rodney Betters, who I'm also dressed up as for this episode. Betters tells us that the man in the cutscene is named Paxton Fettel, and he's the subject of a top secret program at the Armacham Technology Corporation, or ATC. Fettel is a test to see if a commander could psychically control troops, and as per the cutscenes, it seems like he can, and Betters tells us that he's taken an entire battalion of clone soldiers with him. So with Fettel going rogue, it's up to F.E.A.R to track him down, and setting off, Pointman suddenly gets a strange vision.
What's the first thing you remember?
Where are you taking him?
You will be a god among men.
Yeah, it's probably nothing. Arriving in Fettel's area, Betters tells us to go get him, and getting out of the car, we take control of Pointman. At this exact point, something that always strikes me is not the controls or really anything interactive in general, it's the atmosphere. This whole area feels cold, and this feeling is absolutely a testament to the level design in this game, because while F.E.A.R does lack a lot of level location variety, the environments we do visit are extremely well realized. Auburn, the district this opening part of the game takes place in, is an abandoned part of the city for some unknown reason, and somehow the design in these levels makes you really feel it. You don't even get that feeling that someone could be watching you from a window or anything. The place just feels dead. Heading into the building, you don't find Fettel, but instead a man who's been evidently tortured to death.
Looks like we're too late, boss. Just leftovers.
The transmitter signal's coming from nearby. He's gotta be around there somewhere.
Going to the roof, we're ambushed by Fettel, who yammers on about some cryptic stuff before he pieces out, and waking up, Betters tells us that Fettel has gone to a water treatment plant for whatever reason. So after being tasked with following him, we board a helicopter with another unit and set off to the facility. Upon arriving, we go to enter with our squad. The team leader tasks Pointman with finding the gate switch, and heading out to explore, we find one of the only mechanics in the game outside of shooting people, and these are infusions. In the game, you get two infusion types, health and reflex. Health is pretty obvious. Every time you get one of these, it increases Pointman's health by an extra 5 points. The reflex infusions, on the other hand, increase the amount of time you can spend in slow motion, which I know I haven't talked about yet, but we will get there. And look, the only reason I'm really bringing this up is because A, there's a comically small amount of depth to the gameplay outside of combat, and B, because these things are really, really addictive to find. Through the levels, you'll sometimes see these things, and there's just something that activates in my brain that makes me want to go get it.
Let me in. Let me in.
I swear, I don't even know why this happens, but my dopamine receptors go off whenever I see the glow of one of these things in a dark room. And now that I've gotten that little rant out of my system, I do have a little question about these upgrades though. Why the fuck is Pointman shooting up every single glowing syringe he finds in the city? There is no way that F.E.A.R has been planting these things all around the city to help their operatives, so the next best guess is that these are either street drugs or commonly used medical devices, which in either case, fucking ew. Why on earth do you have so much faith in these things, Pointman? Hey guys, if you sent Bioshock protagonist Jack and F.E.A.R protagonist Pointman to Detroit, who do you think would get hepatitis first? Finding the gate controls, we flip it, hearing the sound of gunfire nearby, and heading back to our squad, they've melted? In a vision, we can see a young girl killing the soldiers, and naturally after seeing something like that, we continue the mission alone and enter our first fight. So this is an enemy named the Replica soldier. In the lore, Replica forces are a part of the package that comes with psychic commanders. In F.E.A.R 1, we go up against the 4th generation of these guys, and they're essentially cloned super soldiers, heightened reflexes, heightened accuracy, and zero hesitation. They don't think for themselves, only carrying out orders they receive from their commander, who in this case is Paxton Fettel. According to the Armacham Field Guide, this program had its roots in the Vietnam War, where the idea of having absolute control of your ground forces to allow for easier coordination was becoming a rapidly attractive thought. And by the time of F.E.A.R 1, Armacham has cracked the problem somehow. So long story short, these soldiers are just extensions of Fettel's will, with all of them pretty much being linked into one brain. And the game does a really, really good job at displaying this, because the AI in this game is smart. And I'm talking about the levels of smart that we still don't see in enemy AI on a normal basis today. To break it down, the enemies operate off a system called GOAP, or Goal-Orientated Action Planning. Each soldier and squad has a goal that isn't predetermined, but instead one they choose. The easiest way to explain it would be to say that the system is reactionary. A squad's overall goal might be to defend an area, and an individual soldier's job within that squad might be to patrol said area. Then when Pointman shows up, his job is all of a sudden to kill Pointman and balance his role of defending the area. From here, the soldier has options based on what's happening. Is Pointman in the open, I can shoot him. Is he shooting at me? Maybe I should go into cover. Is Pointman in cover? Maybe I can flank, or maybe I can throw a grenade. Each of these soldiers has the capacity to make these decisions based on what they know about the situation, and the system gets more and more layered the bigger the enemy squad is. If Pointman is hiding in cover, the squad may decide that the best plan of action is for 2 soldiers to aim in the area they last saw Pointman, while another flanks, and if there aren't any flank routes, 2 can aim on Pointman's position while 1 tosses a grenade. This system is still one of the mind-boggling things about F.E.A.R. In a lot of games there comes a point when you've got the AI figured out and you can almost play with their behaviors, but in F.E.A.R. you'll probably never see the same behavior twice because the AI is actively adapting to its situation.
It's a learning robot.
And don't get me wrong, there are ways to game the system, but you're never going to see the same reaction to you messing with their tactics. While one soldier might see fit to hide behind a corner and wait for you when he can't find you, another soldier in the same scenario might decide it's best to push up or flank to your last known position. And I know all this sounds like it would be unfair since the AI sounds like it's just as smart as the player, but it's really pretty balanced in regards since the soldiers won't execute an action or make a decision without telling their squad mates. The enemies actually do have to communicate with their team if they're going to do something for the other soldiers to know what's going on. This means you can eavesdrop on whatever strategy they're cooking up and then plan a counter. Another thing I really like about the system is, once again, if a soldier doesn't know something, they just don't know. It really annoys me in those games where one enemy sees you and suddenly everyone in the area just has GPS coordinates to your exact location, but here that isn't the case. Like in this clip, I killed a replica that strayed too far from his squad and they have no idea what happened to him. All they heard was the gunshot, they can't reach their buddy on the radio, and they are freaking out. In fact, they know so little about what's happening, they won't even go along with their buddy's plan when he wants to push in. It's little things like this and other tiny details like replicas noticing when you use your flashlight or make a loud noise nearby that makes the enemies feel really smart, not just stormtroopers for you to blast through, but legitimate threats, each in their own capacity. Now that's just a little snapshot of the gameplay, and it's pretty incomplete because I haven't even really talked about the other side of the coin. I haven't talked about what the amazing man of points can do, but considering that we're still technically at the very start of the game and Pointman is waiting for me to stop talking about AI, we should probably just get to it. So after our first engagement with Replica forces, we make our way through some warehouses until we run into the little girl again, who flings us out a window.
He's alive.
Should I call in a medevac?
He doesn't appear to be injured.
Waking up, the game actually starts for real, as the F.E.A.R. team medic Jin finds us and sends us on our way to find Paxton.
You're lucky to be alive. Like, they don't already know that? Are you saying that I'm stupid?
From here on, the rest of the level is just a lot of shooting and there's not much to say about it, but I would like to talk about the actual level design, because in its own special way to me, the docks are beautiful. For me, this fondness of the atmosphere probably comes down to games I've been influenced by in my life. Half-Life 2 specifically was one of my first FPS games, and that thing has you trudging through every kind of back alley environment there is. Literal back alleys, sewers, old canals, abandoned towns. The game gave me a taste for these old, forgotten environments. It made urban decay one of my favorite environment designs in gaming, and even influenced me to do some urban exploring when I was younger. So with this taste acquired, when I played F.E.A.R. for the first time, it was like crack.
What are you going there? It's a bit of crack.
So many environments in the game are just decaying, dying, old, abandoned, and just downright drab. It's clear that the city of Fairport isn't exactly thriving, and I fucking love it. Anyways, the water treatment facility is a pretty great starting level for the game because there's just so much you don't know. Through the area, we can learn through listening to voicemails and hacking laptops that Armacham, the corporation that created Paxton Federal, is using the water treatment facility to monitor readings coming from the Auburn district in Fairport. The information you receive about the overall plot in both this level and the next is actually pretty eerie in the way that it blends with the whole atmosphere. You're making your way through this facility city fighting soulless soldiers, seeing the visage of a little girl out of the corner of your eye in the darkness, and all while picking up the pieces about a big corporation trying to cover something up. Something is really off here, you can feel it, and once again I'll say that this game feels cold. Oh yeah, we haven't talked about the little girl yet. If you guys know anything about F.E.A.R, then you probably know who this girl is by name at least, but I won't spoil anything because at this point a first-time player also knows nothing about her except that she is fucking scary. F.E.A.R just does this amazing thing where it never gives you a break. Gunfights feel lonely, and sections between these fights are extremely daunting. Usually there will be heavy ambience that plays, and as soon as you see your flashlight flicker and get a signal from an unknown source, get ready for some haunted house shenanigans.
I'm done here.
Sometimes the girl just appears when you're not expecting it, jump scaring you, and at other points you might just catch her watching you. I've always felt she's kind of like a G-Man type character that you can always just kind of see in the distance. Except in this case, the only difference is that G-Man doesn't just jump out at Gordon every 5 seconds and go, "Boo, Mr. Freeman, I got you good, didn't I?" There's not much more to note about this level other than the fact that we hear that Spencer has gone missing. He's the bald guy from the start of the game, by the way, and he never shows back up again. I'm not joking, he shows up at the start of the game, you hear he's gone missing, and he never comes back up. He's gone. Like, it is a little eerie, but it's just kind of funny that he's just introduced and then he just disappears. Around this part, we once again find that Paxton has once again escaped, finding another one of his victims. At this point, it's beginning to become clear that Paxton is conducting a kind of investigation, moving from place to place, looking for something or someone. All we really have at this point is a name. Alma.
Where is Alma? I don't know what you're talking about. Some secrets get buried deeper than others, but I know where to dig. No, wait, you've got the wrong guy! Hush now, Mr. Moody. The time for talk is done.
After this, Replica forces begin pulling out of the water treatment plant, and it's clear that the party is officially over, with reports coming in that there's been an attack on Armacham's headquarters. So fighting our way to the exit, a Black Hawk comes and picks us up. Now on this helicopter ride, I actually have a fun fact for you. We are officially a quarter way through the game. Yeah, this thing is short, and in my opinion, it's one of the game's downsides, because through this whole game, all you really do is chase Paxton Fettel from one location to the next, to the next, to the next, and it begins to fall into a bit of a pattern. Pointman enters a location, goes to get Paxton, Paxton gets away, and Pointman exits the location. At a certain point, you just begin to feel like you're not even a part of the story. You're just an NPC chasing the protagonist in his campaign. It's kind of like if in Black Ops 2, literally every mission was just like, we gotta kill Menendez. Nothing else, just every mission was like an assassination on Menendez. Another thing that hurts the story is that everything goes wrong, but in a pretty smooth kind of way. At the start of the campaign, you're a F.E.A.R operative and nothing really changes through the story. You move from one area to the next and pretty much every area ends with Rodney going, damn, he got away, buddy. We'll get him next time though. It literally just feels like you're going through the motions of being an anti-paranormal agent. Like at some points it feels like none of the characters really care, like they're just doing it because it's their job. Is it a Monday or something in Fairport? There's no point when F.E.A.R is like, damn, we're a little in over our heads here, or we lose contact with our handler. We just spend the whole game taking on an army, and both Rodney and Pointman are just chill with it. Arriving at Armacham, all our army buddies get mowed down, and we have to head in alone. This part of the game is kind of where my middle-of-the-road opinion of the whole experience comes from. On one hand, I have fond memories of how the game makes me feel in its overall atmosphere, but playing through it is honestly a bit of a slog, and I think that comes mostly from the Armacham section of the game. About 50% of your total playtime in the campaign is spent in Armacham, and I'll tell you, it is not a good thing. There's points in this game when you'll just be wondering if it's even worth looking around, because there never seems to be anything in these levels that's relevant to the story. Offices look like offices, they're neat and tidy, and yeah, that's about it. Apart from the creepy little girl jumping out at you every couple of levels, there's just not a whole lot in this area that makes it interesting. But at the same time, a huge brunt of the story context comes out of these levels, which makes for a slightly annoying gameplay loop of fight squads, something spooky happens, you listen to a voicemail, repeat. Oh, and do that for 2 hours, by the way. Like I said, it just feels like you're going through the motions at some points. But I don't want to just complain in this video, so to talk about some interesting stuff in this area, I'll start with our main objective. While we're still attempting to apprehend Paxton Fettel, we have a few other things on our agenda, like locating a squad that's gone missing inside the building. And on our way to their last known position, we have to travel through the ground floor. And do you hear that? It almost sounds like buzzing. This is the assassin, and I've now officially mentioned an enemy by name, which means that we've entered the enemy section of the video. What? So F.E.A.R 1 has a few enemy types to cover: the Assassin, the Rev 6, the UAVs, ATC Security, Heavies, and the Replica Force family. The enemies you most commonly face in the game is of course the good old Replica soldiers, and I'm not going to go into extreme detail on these guys because I don't really think it matters much, but replicas come in all sorts of types. You have snipers, scouts, tactical specialists, elites, and personally I find it pretty impressive that the devs went through all the trouble of making new models for all these different types of enemies, because the differences in all of these enemies are pretty minimal. Scouts are weaker and have worse aim, tactical replicas wear heavier armor, snipers won't give away their position until they take the first shot. Like seriously, in gameplay all of these guys act pretty much the same in a fight, so it doesn't really matter. The special enemies is where the gameplay actually begins to broaden a little bit, however. The assassin uses cloaking tech to get the drop on the player and only uses melee attacks, making it one of the least effective enemies in the game, since when they're idle you can hear them from a mile away, and once you get over the initial shock of seeing a soldier stuck to the wall waiting for you, it's pretty easy to dispatch these guys. The Rev 6 is just a mech that kind of walks slowly after you while firing missiles, and it's pretty imposing the first time you meet one, but it's also a pretty damn easy enemy to take down. Just peek around the corner and unload all of your bullets into it for about a minute and it will be pretty dead. The UAVs are a bit of a weird one. They're shielded drones that fly around shooting lasers at you. The Heavies are just super heavily armored replicas that have a rivet gun. Armacham Security are just reskinned Replica forces, but they have worse tactics than Replica forces. Okay, so you might be wondering why I'm rattling these off, and it's because fighting them isn't that interesting, and it's not because they're not interesting enemies, it's because they're not used in interesting ways. Like for example, only 10 Replica assassins show up in the entire game. That's right, the cool cloaking dudes only show up 10 times max, and it's never when any other enemy types are around. This also goes for other enemies like the Rev 6 or the UAVs. Through the game, none of these enemies are used in interesting combinations. You'll know it's time to fight some assassins because in a scripted sequence you see one run away in the distance, or you will know it's time to fight some UAVs because you hear one flying around close by but you don't see it. But the weird thing is that all of these signifiers very quickly become a notification to the player that you won't be fighting any other enemy type for the next 5 minutes. It just feels a little strange to me. One of the only reoccurring enemy combos we get through the game are the Heavy paired with some Replica soldiers, and that's about it. Which is a little disappointing for me because it's clear that all of these special enemy types are suited to specific jobs, and yet the game never feels comfortable throwing a wrench at the player and saying, hey, what if you had to fight some Replica soldier guys but also some assassins at the same time? Or what if you had to fight a Rev 6 and some drones at the same time? time. It feels like the enemy types are a little wasted and used in a very safe way. Gameplay-wise, F.E.A.R feels a lot like a memory test. The game throws a curveball at you, the player deals with it, and a few levels later, the game throws the exact same curveball at you again. It's almost like it's saying, "Hey buddy, do you know how to deal with this one?" Yeah. I do. It feels like there's a very specific solution to many enemy encounters in the game, and those same enemy encounters are just recycled multiple times, which is something that extends to the Replica soldier encounters. And I'll just be clear here, this next point is not criticism. To set the stage, I'll use an example with that being the Batman Arkham games. In those games, the combat scenarios are not hard. If you're playing on PC, all you really need to remember are two things. Mouse 1 to attack, mouse 2 to counter. The simplicity of the system makes the combat a breeze, but what makes the gameplay addicting is how well you perform. The higher combo Batman gets, the faster he moves. You can unlock special takedowns, you can destroy enemy weapons, and it feels great. The challenge isn't fighting the enemy, it's seeing how well you can beat the enemy, and that's the same for F.E.A.R. Once you learn the way the Replica soldiers react to different scenarios, they essentially become your playthings. And to tell you why, I need to actually explain a little bit about how Pointman controls in this game. Pretty much our dude is pretty capable from step 1. Pressing control sends us into slow motion where we move slightly faster and aim easier. Right clicking allows him to melee, and this attack changes depending on input. Moving forwards and crouching as you melee will make our character slide. Jumping while moving forwards will allow you to bicycle kick the enemy, and simply jumping while meleeing will have Pointman dish out a kick. Now when I first played F.E.A.R, I played it like a cover shooter, because if you're sighted by an enemy, it could be very well game over for you. But for this video, when I played through it again, I started thinking, why is a close ranged ability more important in the game than aiming down sights? Pressing mouse 2 doesn't aim your gun, it dishes out a melee attack. I thought about this and it suddenly hit me. In this game, you play as a single guy going up against an army of strategically inclined soldiers, so the only logical counter to that is to be unpredictable. Using unorthodox methods of fighting to confuse the AI that is using orthodox methods is the best way to play this game. It's hard to explain because the idea is to be unpredictable, but I'll say that later in the game I was throwing grenades less to kill enemies or even flush them out, but instead to confuse them. Enemies in this game are also pretty easily staggered, so a lot of the time if an enemy was hunkered down behind cover, I would just rush them while firing my shotgun. The experience really devolves into a series of Hail Mary moves from the player, which I think is really cool. Figuring out that the best solution for fighting a thinking enemy is to not give them time to think, and exploiting that fact is just something that brings the gameplay together for me. It also helps that the more you experiment with game mechanics, the easier your life gets. Like, for example, if you're trigger happy enough, you'll eventually figure out that power boxes and fire extinguishers are explosive, or that you can shoot grenades while they're airborne to detonate them early. There's a lot of variables when it comes to combat in this game, and a lot of the time it comes down to the player preference and how they want to deal with their current situation. This preference bleeds pretty heavily into weapons as well. Usually the weapons you choose to pick up won't be starved for ammo due to how many enemies are packing those same weapons, so the game encourages you to bring the tools that work for you into gunfights. For this video, I won't really go into weapons too much because it's kind of your stock standard early 2000s kit. You have some pistols, some rifles, some shotguns, some explosives, proximity mines, you get the idea. But one weapon I do want to talk about is the one you can find while wandering around Armacham, and this weapon is the Type 7 particle weapon. I guess you could call it the sniper rifle of the game, but I'll raise you and say that it's the only weapon in the game. Oh, you think I'm joking? No. If you pick this gun up, you are not gonna want to put it down. And this is for two reasons. Reason 1, it's an insta-kill on most enemies. Reason 2, it turns enemies' dead bodies into charred skeletons, which is fucking awesome. Anyway, that's all I really have to yap on about with the gameplay for now. On a surface level, I'll say that it is still a first-person shooter, so for all the depth of gameplay I've talked about, the best way to solve all your problems is to just shoot. So the gameplay can't really make it any more enjoyable to be trudging through the same 10 office rooms for 2 hours straight. Have I mentioned that I don't like the Armacham levels yet? Back on track, we eventually find what's left of the missing squad we've been looking for, which seems to be not a whole lot. Jin shows up to inspect the scene, and we can actually see the little girl who's been stalking us on this balcony just watching. From here, our objective goes back to finding Paxton Fettel, who's apparently going after a girl named Alice Wade that's in the building, and...
Hello? Oh, it's you.
Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you about him. So earlier in our journey through Armacham, we met this distinguished gentleman who goes by the name of Norton Mapes, and holy shit, I cannot stand this guy.
Can you help me get into the network?
What am I, an IS lackey? Tell you what, you disable the local security system, and I'll see what I can do about the server.
I can disable it remotely once I'm logged in.
No, you can't. It's on a separate network.
Up until the point that we meet Mapes, the game has a pretty dark and moody tone, and also, let me mention, a pretty realistic art style. But then this cartoonishly fat man falls through the ceiling and gives us a nice big injection of tonal whiplash. Like, I don't know what the devs were thinking when they made this character. He's not even funny enough to be comic relief, and he's obviously meant to be comic relief because every time he shows up, this goofy ass soundtrack starts playing. No. Another thing I really dislike about him is that he's a bad guy. Every time we meet him in Armacham, he exploits our help, then disappears, and just after this point, he actually tries to kill us by enabling the security system.
See this button? I wonder what this does.
Also, during this sequence where we're chasing him, every time he shows up, it's just a little sting sound effect of his soundtrack just plays. It can't just be me that feels like they're getting mixed messages, right? Because is this guy meant to be a threat or a joke? Because if he's a threat, he's not very threatening. And if he's a joke, he's not very funny. Anyway, I don't want to talk about this guy anymore because he just makes my blood boil. But you might be wondering why he's trying to kill us. Well, it's because he's trying to cover up something at Armacham. And once we figure this out, the game actually starts to get pretty interesting. All through the Armacham HQ levels, there's a bunch of voicemails that you can listen to and laptops you can hack into that give you information. And by piecing the story that it tells all together, we can learn that there is a schism within the top management at the company. Overall, the info we get is that there are two sides, comprised of Genevieve R. Steed, the president of Armacham, and Harlan Wade, a high-ranking scientist within the organization. Harlan is mostly pissed off at Genevieve because she reopened an abandoned Armacham facility that Harlan used 20 years earlier for a failed project called Origin. Genevieve sent 2 teams into the facility, however they disappeared and is now still trying to figure out ways to reopen the place. Through voicemails, we can hear that Harlan has been constantly warning that reopening the facility would be catastrophic, and when we correlate some other info, it starts making sense why. Once again, through voicemails and hacking laptops, my favorite way of learning video game lore, we can learn that Paxton Fettel was a part of Project Origin until something called a synchronicity event took place. Because of this, Origin, the project, and the facility was shut down. Now, there's 3 things I want to touch on to help you understand what's happening here. To avoid any confusion, I want to state that this game takes place in 2025. The second thing is that yes, Harlan Wade is the father of Alice Wade, the woman that we're rescuing. And the third thing is that the vault that Fettel is searching for is also the Origin facility. So mixing all this together, we're slowly building a picture of what's happening here. Fettel is attempting to locate the Origin facility, and we can assume that the Alma he's looking for is there too. In the level, this isn't the only connection we have to Project Origin. While wandering around Armacham, we run into this guy tied to a chair named Aldous Bishop, who seems to have some idea of what's going on here. Trying to evacuate him, he's killed by Armacham security, but through voicemails we can learn that he was working with Alice Wade to investigate the Auburn district for reasons that I'll get into later. Anyway, back on our objective, we are still set on rescuing Alice Wade. So making our way across the Armacham facility and rescuing her from the Replica forces, she tells us that she won't go anywhere without her dad, who's gone to the Origin facility.
I need to get to my dad.
Some kind of classified facility? I've never heard of it. There isn't even a street address, just UTM coordinates. The entrances are all hidden, but I have passcodes.
Beginning our escort of Alice Wade, we play through a really fun elevator sequence where all the replica forces on their floors just press the elevator button and set ambushes for us on each floor.
Why are all the floors lighting up? Uh-oh. Somebody's pressing the call buttons.
And I just love how much this sequence clashes, since you get into a huge gunfight and then you just get back into the elevator with there's all this cheery music until you get into your next gunfight.
Get ready! Here we go again. This sucks. You don't have to kill everybody. Sorry I freaked out. I'm just not used to being shot at.
Anyway, making it to the rooftop, the chopper we were meant to catch is destroyed, and Alice decides to get to the Origin facility by herself by heading down to the parking garage. We give chase but end up missing her by a few seconds. But it's okay, because Rodney just tells us to head to the garage roof for extraction, and man, the soundtrack goes hard. And I'll tell you something, you will not find me in the club on a Friday night, but if they're playing F.E.A.R original soundtrack garage battle, you better fucking believe I'm pulling up.
Good to see you in one piece.
Making it to the roof, we finally fucking leave Armacham HQ, and like, wow, that whole section is just way too long. Like, all of the footage you just saw, just in the office area, just think about doing that for 2 hours. There's no deviation. It's just mindlessly walking around samey environments, and if there's one thing I'm glad the devs actually listen to between games, it's this one critique that all of their environments just kind of look the same. But don't worry, the low point of the game for me at least is now over, and in my opinion, I think the second half of the game is why I actually like it. See, the chopper we boarded is taking us to the Origin facility in Auburn, and seeing the district from the sky while knowing about the history is kind of eerie. Back in Armacham HQ, we could learn that Bishop and Alice were trying to figure out what was wrong with Auburn. According to their records, about 20 years earlier, people began feeling uneasy in the area. Accompanying that uneasiness was nausea and headaches. This led to the district slowly becoming abandoned until the time the game takes place, where it's a complete ghost town. The whole reason Armacham was running tests at the water treatment facility is because the very groundwater in Auburn seems to be contaminated with something. I like Auburn so much in this game because for me, I was more excited to visit it than to find out all the answers for like who the little girl was. And that's because through the game, everything points to this area. The water treatment facility says there's something leaking out of that place. Armacham is buzzing with paranoia about the area, and seeing it from the air in the chopper, seeing all the lights and yet knowing no one's down there, it's eerie and it's fucking excellent world building. Before we make it to the Origin facility, our chopper is down and we crash into an old hotel. With our companions needing medical attention, Pointman continues on by himself again, and we have to fight through Replica forces to make our escape. Once on the street, we can truly appreciate the ghost town that Auburn's become, and the supernatural activity continuously gets stronger the closer we get to the vault in this area. This exact moment is when I realized something about fear. The atmosphere that this game spits out, it's a specific feeling that you get through most of the levels in the game, and that is the feeling of being alone. The ambience of each level feels cold and distant. The sparse allies you have either communicate with you over the radio or just vanish as quickly as they appeared. The enemies you fight aren't even really people, they're all just drones controlled by Paxton. The game just has this incredible ability to make it feel like you're you're completely alone, even in the middle of a gunfight. The Auburn levels especially get this feeling across perfectly, with the dark alleyways and the abandoned apartments. But unfortunately, good things aren't meant to last, and the levels set in the alleys are some of the shortest in the game for whatever reason, and we only get to fight through the streets for about 20 minutes before we finally reach the Origin facility.
But you can't do this to me.
Upon entering the place, we begin getting a lot more answers, since the voicemails and laptops we can hack give us way more info to go on. Pretty much Project Origin was based all around a single psychic, and the goal was to see if this individual's power could be replicated in order for Armacham's Psychic Commander project to succeed. This individual was none other than Alma, the woman that Paxton has been looking for, and the scientists on Project Origin figured that there was no way to replicate Alma's powers other than genetically, which meant that Alma would have to be bred. So, with lead researcher Harlan Wade using his genetic material, Alma was impregnated when she was around 14. At 15, she gave birth to 2 babies that Armacham calls the prototypes. The first prototype was apparently a failure, but the second was not, and he was given the name Paxton Fettel. Yep, that's right, Paxton Fettel's motivations are finally revealed. Paxton is Alma's son, and he's just trying to free his mother. For all this time, Alma has been kept in a medically induced coma, and she's now about to be freed. Working our way through the facility, we can find that Harlan Wade is here with the goal of freeing Alma. As well as that, Paxton has made his way to the facility and Norton fucking mapes. But it's okay, because Harlan shoots him.
Look, I'm just doing my job. I'm doing what has to be done.
Yeah, baby! Woo-hoo!
Talking to Mapes, he tells us that Alma cannot be allowed to go free, and if it comes to it, we need to destroy the entire facility. So after a bit of busy work, we manage to open the vault and head in. Once inside, everything starts to come into focus. We find Paxton knelt over the body of a dead Alice Wade, and in a bit of a proto-boss fight, he tells us that we are one of Alma's sons as well, and yeah, that's another big reveal that Paxton just kind of mutters out. Pointman is the first and failed prototype child of Alma. However, this doesn't really affect Pointman too much because he doesn't care. He just shoots Paxton in the head.
I will set her free.
With Paxton dead, we can move through the facility some more and find that all of his soldiers have now been deactivated. And taking the elevator, we finally make it to the center of the vault. Heading to the control room, we can see that Harlan's beat us here, and as he begins the procedure of freeing Alma, he tells us a story.
We put her in there 2 days before her 8th birthday.
Error. No life signs detected.
She died 6 days after we pulled the plug.
Release sequence complete.
This is how it ends.
This is the big reveal of the game. Alma has been dead for 20 years. She's the girl that's been stalking us. She's the Pointman's mother, and now her spirit has been reunited with her body, allowing her to finally take revenge. As Alma attempts to leave the facility, Pointman switches to Plan B and damages the site's power generators. As we make a break for the exit, Alma sends manifested nightmares after us, and surviving the onslaught, we make it out onto an abandoned street. The sky is beginning to light up in anticipation of a new day, and against all odds. In the epilogue, Pointman has luckily survived, and we're picked up by a chopper. From the air, we can see that all of Auburn has been leveled by the explosion, and just as Jin asks what happened to Alma...
What was that sound?
And that's F.E.A.R. Now, you probably have no idea what actually just happened, right? Well, that's okay. During this breakdown, I've tried to summarize information as best I can, but the thing is about this game is that you're given a lot of info that's out of order, so I didn't really want to bring out the timeline just in the middle of the video. So to help you understand, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the full lore. Starting at the very beginning, Alma is actually named Alma Wade, and yes, she's Harlan Wade's daughter. As a young girl, Alma had reoccurring nightmares and terrifying visions of monsters. One of Harlan's colleagues at Armacham suggested that she might be a psychic, and after conducting some tests, they found this to be the case. Over the next few years, Armacham experimented cruelly on Alma, with Harlan leading the research. And yeah, I hope that if you had any idea that Harlan Wade was a good guy or doing anything good, this is changing your mind. At some point, Alma began becoming aggressive towards the staff working on Origin, giving them hallucinations, nightmares, and such. In F.E.A.R. Gold Edition, there was actually a live-action special feature where a doctor tries to interview Alma but is just instead slowly driven insane by her. To avoid any more of this behavior, she was put into a coma just before she turned 8, and years later she was pulled out and impregnated with 2 prototypes, made from both her and Origin researchers' DNA, including Harlan Wade. Like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? Ew. You know, the fact that Pointman is technically inbred now makes his F.E.A.R. 3 model make a lot of sense, and why it looks so fucking weird. At 15, Alma gave birth to Pointman, and just a year later, Paxton fell. Both of her children were then taken away from her, and she was put back into a coma in case they needed to use her again for more prototypes. Later, when Paxton was 10, he and Alma somehow connected psychically and caused the synchronicity event that got Origin shut down. Because of all the people Paxton ended up killing, Alma's life support was shut down and the facility was closed. 6 days after being taken off life support, Alma's heart stopped, but something stayed behind. Maybe it was the lingering anger of a spirit done untold wrongs, but the area of Auburn that surrounded the facility slowly began to change. The groundwater was tainted with something. People spending time there became sick, and eventually the entire area was abandoned, and it stayed that way for 20 years. In 2025, Genevieve Aristide, the president of Armacham, decided that she wanted to reopen the facility. However, the teams that were sent inside disappeared, and unbeknownst to Genevieve, she had just reawoken Alma's dormant spirit. Taking the opportunity, Alma found Paxton again, merging their minds in another synchronicity event. In the opening cutscene, we're actually seeing Paxton gain all of his mother's memories. Really, he's feeling everything that was ever done to her. Paxton knew he had to free his mother and began the rampage he goes on in the game. Meanwhile, through all of this, Harlan Wade was living with a guilty conscience. Having tortured his own daughter for science, he decided that enough was enough, and making his way to the Origin facility, he released her as we see in the game. So yeah, that's the story. It's kind of like a messed up family story, and it all comes from the one guy being Harlan Wade, and turns out he's a total piece of shit. Something I really like about F.E.A.R. is it's not really ever stated whether Alma is a paranormal entity or not. They reference psychic energy all the time, and we don't really know if Alma is a ghost or a spirit or anything like that, which I think is just really cool. Is she manifested hate? Is she a ghost? Anyway, even though we've covered everything from the main game, there's just a little bit more to look at with the multiplayer, which is named F.E.A.R. Combat. F.E.A.R. Combat is your average single-player shooter multiplayer mode. You get some guns, you get a map, and you kill other players. It's just kind of unremarkable and doesn't really enrich the world of F.E.A.R. since all of the maps have the same problem as the main game, with them being repetitive and boring. You could literally sum up most of the maps in the game by what they are. Some Armacham building, some city block in Auburn, some industrial facility. The only map that has a bit of personality is the Asylum, which is actually a lot of fun to explore. Inside the building you can hear almost ghostly cries. There's a clear history behind the place, and the layout has actually been thought about. Also, if you head to the basement, you can find a solitary confinement room that my friends and I liked so much that we affectionately dubbed it the piss room. So that's F.E.A.R. My thoughts on the game is that I can tell that I love something about this game, but I just can't figure out what it is. Something that really pulls me out of the game is how you never really feel like you're a part of the story. Pointman is a part of this narrative, but it never seems like he's needed. We spend the whole game just chasing Paxton from one location to the next, and by the end of the game it feels like you haven't done much. You've failed all of your objectives, but along the way you've learned why the guy you needed to stop needed to be stopped. And the revelations that Pointman is Alma's son doesn't really hit home at all, because Pointman isn't a character. He's a vessel for the player. So with the big reveal, I'm not thinking, oh, I wonder what Pointman's reaction is going to be to this piece of information, because he's not going to react. He's not a character. Going into this retrospective, I had an idea that I liked F.E.A.R, and after everything you've heard me say, you might be thinking that I don't like it, but I do. I like it in a special kind of way. For me, there aren't really any in-between factors when it comes to my opinions on the game. The things I love, like the atmosphere, the combat, and the art direction, are fucking perfect. They give me that excited kid playing an FPS feeling again. But then the things that don't land really don't land for me. Like how you have to stitch together the story by dropping everything every 5 minutes to listen to a voicemail. Honestly, since the game is meant to be a mystery that's unfolding before you, I don't think they could have done it any other way, but that still doesn't make the way they chose all that great, at least for me. Overall, F.E.A.R. gets a pretty great 8 out of 10. Huh, I wonder who that could be. Hello? Oh yeah, Pointman, hey, what's up, man? Paxton fellow escaped, huh? Okay, buddy, let me just coordinate with my intel team here and I'll get a battle plan for you. Okay, buddy, got a new objective for you. Find, apprehend, and capture Paxton Fellow.
Hello?